In Lochdubh, plain soup becomes heritage broth when the price is high enough, and an old net shed becomes elegant if someone fills it with candles. The Lochside Table had opened on the harbour edge with polished driftwood tables, black slate menus, and dishes so small that several locals wondered whether supper would arrive later. Catriona Bell said the restaurant would honour Lochdubh's food heritage. The village, being Lochdubh, came along partly to be honoured and partly to see what price honour was fetching. Hamish Macbeth only hoped the evening would pass without Blair shouting, "Lugs stealing anything," or the visiting celebrity chef insulting the wrong person too early. But before the night was over, one little corner of black slate would matter far more than the menu written on it. Chapter 1. The Net Shed with Napkins. The old net shed had once smelled of rope, salt, fish, and hard weather. Now it smelled of beeswax candles, hot butter, and money. Hamish Macbeth stood near the door of the Lochside Table and looked about with mild disbelief. The rough stone walls had been scrubbed and lit from below. The beams still showed old stains, but now they had little sprigs of dried heather tied to them. Every table held a black slate tasting menu card, polished smooth and written on in white script. Luggs had planted himself near the kitchen door, watching each plate pass with official interest. "Is the dog necessary?" asked Catriona Bell. "He's with the police," said Hamish. "He is staring at my scallops. He takes his duties seriously." Catriona gave him a look that said she had returned to Lochdubh with better clothes and less patience. She was handsome, dark-haired, and very controlled, except around the eyes. Tonight mattered to her. The restaurant was not only a business. It was proof that she had come back as someone important. "Please keep things calm," she said. "I'll do my best." "That is not quite the same as a promise." "It's better than one from Blair." Her mouth twitched despite herself, then stiffened as Mrs. Patel entered with a small jar wrapped in a tea towel. "I brought chutney," said Mrs. Patel, "since you asked for local contributions." "How kind," said Catriona. "The menu is already finalised, of course?" "I did not expect it to be served. I thought perhaps your staff could taste it." They smiled at one another with all the warmth of two knives in a drawer. At a corner table, Morag Grant sat very straight in her good blue blouse. She had barely touched the water in front of her. Hamish went over. "Evening, Morag." "Hamish, enjoying yourself?" "I am trying to decide whether that is my mother's fish soup on the menu or a poem about it." Hamish looked at the slate card. The first course read, "A memory of shoreline. Smoked shellfish broth, peat cream, pickled sea herbs." Morag tapped the words. "Catriona came to my kitchen in February. Said she was collecting old recipes. Said she wanted to honour local women." "And did you give permission?" "I gave her tea. There is a difference." Before Hamish could answer, the room shifted. Heads turned toward the door. Gavin Harte had arrived. He was shorter than he looked on television, but he carried himself as if rooms had been built to receive him. Silver touched his hair at the temples. His scarf was bright, his smile brighter, and his eyes missed nothing useful. "My dear Catriona," he said, kissing the air near her cheek. "How very atmospheric. One can almost smell the honest poverty." A few tourists laughed. The locals did not. Catriona introduced him to Hamish. "The village constable," said Gavin. "Excellent. Local colour." "We try not to run in the rain," said Hamish. Gavin looked amused. "Not bad?" Catriona led him to the best table by the harbour window. He picked up the black slate menu card and read aloud. "A memory of shoreline. Soup has begun writing its memoirs." The first course arrived in shallow bowls carried by Isla Kerr, a nervous young waitress whose apron still showed fold marks. Gavin tasted the broth, closed his eyes, then laughed. "Oh, Catriona, this is Cullen skink wearing perfume." Morag made a small sound. Gavin turned. "You disagree?" "I agree. It had a name before. Someone dressed it up. There was a little stir among the locals. Catriona's smile stayed fixed. Gavin looked from Morag to Catriona with growing interest. "Recipe permissions are such dull things. Dull, but useful. Everything was properly discussed?" said Catriona. Disgust, he said. Such a roomy word. As he spoke, he tapped the corner of the Slate menu against the table. Tap, tap, tap. On the third tap, Hamish heard a small crack. A corner had chipped from the Slate card. Fine black dust marked Gavin's thumb, and a tiny triangular flake dropped near the table leg. Cheap, said Gavin. Handmade, said Catriona. Sometimes the same thing with better lighting. Hamish bent and picked up the small flake. It was sharp along one edge and left a dark smear on his finger. I'll have Isla sweep that, said Catriona quickly. It might get under someone's shoe, said Hamish, slipping it into his pocket without making a show of it. Gavin noticed and smiled. Do you collect broken things, Constable? Only when folk are careless with them. More courses followed. A scallop under something green, a strip of venison that made Archie MacLean wonder aloud where the rest of the deer had gone, and an oatcake described as ancestral. The tourists seemed delighted. The locals seemed fed, but not convinced. Gavin wrote in a small black notebook throughout. Each time his pen moved, Catriona watched it. At the end of the tasting, Gavin stood and raised his glass. Lochdubh has charm, he said. Enough charm to bottle and sell, if one were shameless enough. A few guests laughed uncertainly. This restaurant is ambitious, but ambition must be honest. If recipes are borrowed, name the lenders. If ingredients are local, prove it. If they are not, don't sell the sea a false passport. The room went quiet. Catriona's face had gone pale beneath her polish. Morag stared at her. Mrs. Patel lowered her eyes, already thinking hard. Isla slipped back toward the kitchen. Outside, mist pressed against the harbour windows. Inside, the Lochside Table still glowed with candles and expensive hope. But Hamish looked at the black dust on his thumb and knew the evening had cracked. Chapter 2. Heritage Broth. The kitchen of the Lochside Table had been built inside the back half of the old net shed, and it was too small for the number of ambitions placed in it. Steam clouded the tiles. Pans hissed. Young cooks moved sideways around one another with the frightened grace of people carrying hot things past expensive reputations. Above the pass, little slips of paper hung in a row, each one bearing a table number and a series of dishes that sounded less like food than weather reports. Hamish stood near the wall, trying to be invisible. He had learned long ago that kitchens told the truth faster than dining rooms. Dining rooms smiled. Kitchens muttered. Catriona Bell stood by the pass with her hands clasped, watching Gavin Harte taste the broth from a clean spoon. Morag Grant had followed them in, despite Catriona's attempt to suggest that guests were happier outside the working area. "I'm not a guest," Morag had said. "Apparently I'm inspiration." That had ended the discussion. Gavin tasted again, then set down the spoon. "Well," he said, "it is not without competence." One of the young cooks looked briefly relieved. "Competence," Gavin continued, "is what remains when courage has gone home early." The relief vanished. Catriona's voice stayed bright. "The broth is one of our key heritage dishes." "Heritage," said Gavin. "A word people use when they want theft to sound warm." No one moved. Morag's face flushed. "That's my mother's soup." Catriona turned sharply. "Morag, please." "No. You came to my kitchen. You wrote it down. My mother used smoked haddock when she had it, onions when she had them, potatoes always, and milk if there was enough." She did not call it shoreline anything. Gavin looked delighted, which was perhaps the worst possible reaction. "There we have it," he said. "A witness with a recipe and a memory. Much better than branding." Catriona's smile began to look painful. "The menu was developed from many community conversations." "Was it?" Morag said. "Then why does it taste like mine?" Hamish watched Catriona. She did not look guilty in the simple way people expected. She looked cornered and proud, and furious at being cornered in front of staff. "There are only so many ways to make fish soup in a fishing village," she said. "Aye," said Morag, "but only one way to lie about where you heard it." A pan clattered somewhere behind them. Isla Kerr carrying a tray of cleaned spoons, had missed the counter. Her hands trembled as she gathered them up. Gavin took out his black notebook. Catriona noticed at once. "There's no need for this to become dramatic." "My dear, it became dramatic when the soup put on evening dress," Hamish said mildly. "Maybe we could all step back before the broth gets arrested." That drew a weak laugh from one of the cooks, quickly swallowed. Gavin turned to Hamish. "Tell me, Constable, do people here sign things?" "Sometimes cheques. Less often confessions. I mean, permissions, releases, agreements for the use of recipes, stories, names." Catriona's chin lifted. "Everything will be available." "Will be?" "It is being beautifully organised." Hamish heard the phrase because it was not the one she had been asked for. Ready was a plain word. Available was plain enough. Beautifully organised belonged to a person buying time. Gavin heard it too. His eyes sharpened. "I shall need to see the recipe permissions," he said. "Supplier invoices as well. And the cold room stock list." "The stock list?" Catriona said. "If a restaurant sells local waters and Highland honesty, one likes to know whether the honesty arrived frozen from abroad." A young chef near the stove stared hard into a pan. Isla looked toward the cold room door and then away. Hamish noticed that too. Catriona said, "Our sourcing is careful." "Careful is another roomy word." Morag gave a short, bitter laugh. "You've a cupboard full of them!" Catriona turned on her. "You were happy enough to talk when you thought it made you important." Morag went still. For the first time that evening, Gavin stopped smiling. There are insults meant to wound, Hamish thought, and there are insults that reveal the wound already there. This one did both. Morag's voice came low. "I talked because you said my mother's way of cooking mattered." "It does matter," said Catriona. "That is exactly why." "No," said Morag. "It matters when her name is still attached to it." The kitchen fell into a silence, broken only by the fan above the stove. Gavin closed his notebook. "I'll look over the paperwork after service." "That won't be possible tonight," Catriona said quickly. "Then tomorrow's column may have to rely on what is possible." Catriona stared at him. The celebrity charm had gone from Gavin Harte's face. What remained was not kindness, but it was clear. He was a vain man, a cruel man perhaps, but he did not like being sold a fake truth when a real one was standing in the same room with red eyes and clenched hands. Hamish stepped toward the door. "Come away, Morag." "I'm not frightened of her." "No. But you're tired, and there are too many knives in here for honest conversation." Morag gave him a look, then allowed herself to be guided back toward the dining room. Behind them, Gavin spoke softly to Catriona, but not softly enough. "Permissions. Invoices. Stock list. Tonight, if you can manage it. I dislike being used as decoration for fraud." Hamish paused at the doorway. Catriona answered in a voice like glass. "You came here to bless an opening, Gavin, not destroy one." "My dear," he said, "sometimes those are the same service." Outside the kitchen, the dining room glowed as if nothing ugly had happened. Candles flickered on black slate. Tourists murmured over tiny puddings. Mrs. Patel watched Morag return to her seat and said nothing, which from Mrs. Patel meant a great deal. Hamish glanced back once. Catriona stood at the pass, very straight, while Gavin wrote again in his notebook. Near the cold room door, Isla Kerr picked up the last fallen spoon and slipped it into a drawer with shaking fingers. Chapter 3. Blair at the pass. By 9 o'clock, rain had begun to strike the harbour windows in hard silver lines. Inside the Lochside Table, the candles still glowed, and the guests still pretended to be comfortable. The tourists were happy enough, for tourists often believed discomfort was part of authenticity. The locals had begun to look at one another with the secret fellowship of people who had eaten too little and paid nothing for it. Hamish stood near the door, watching the room settle into its false peace. Catriona Bell had recovered her smile, but it now sat on her face like a plate balanced too near the edge of a table. Gavin Harte had gone back to charming the guests, though every so often he opened his black notebook and wrote something that made Catriona glance his way. Morag Grant had left early. She had not stormed out. That would have been easier for everyone. She had simply put down her napkin, thanked no one, and walked into the wet night with her shoulders very straight. Mrs. Patel watched her go. "Pride is a poor umbrella," she said quietly. "Aye," said Hamish, "but some folk would rather be soaked than borrow one." Before Mrs. Patel could answer, the front door opened, and Blair came in as if he had been fired from a cannon in Strathbane. He was wet, red-faced, and smoking, though not actually holding a cigarette. The smell clung to him like an assistant. "Macbeth!" he barked. "What's all this?" "A restaurant opening." "I can see it's a restaurant opening. I mean, what's this I'm hearing about trouble?" Hamish looked around the room. Every head had turned. "You're bringing some with you now," he said softly. Blair lowered his voice by half an inch, which for him counted as diplomacy. "I was told this celebrity business was to be kept quiet and respectable. Strathbane does not need headlines about Highland bumpkins throwing soup at television chefs. No soup has been thrown. Yet." Gavin Harte, hearing his name without hearing it, came over with bright interest. "Inspector Blair, I presume?" "Detective Chief Inspector," said Blair. "Of course. The full garnish." Blair stared at him. "What?" Gavin smiled. "Nothing. I was admiring the service." Catriona hurried between them. "Inspector, there is no problem. We are simply at the end of service." "Where's your kitchen?" Blair demanded. Catriona hesitated. "Why?" "Because if there's going to be trouble, it'll start there. Always does. Heat, knives, foreigners." "One of the chefs is from Ullapool," said Hamish. "Same difference when he's waving a pan." The kitchen door swung open, and Isla Kerr came through carrying empty plates. Blair stepped into her path. She stopped so sharply that one plate slid against another. "You," he said. "You working here?" "Yes." "Sir, name?" "Isla Kerr." "Isla Kerr." "Speak up." "Isla Kerr." "Any rows tonight?" Her eyes moved to Catriona, then Gavin, then Hamish. "No, sir." "Don't lie to me, lassie. I've a nose for kitchen rows." Hamish thought that Blair had a nose for fear, and often mistook it for evidence. "She's carrying plates," he said. "Let her by." Blair ignored him. "Did Mrs. Grant threaten anyone?" Isla's face tightened. "No." "You sure?" "She was upset." "Upset how?" Catriona said, "This is unnecessary." Blair rounded on her. "I'll decide what's necessary." The room went still again. The poor girl's eyes filled, though she bit down on it bravely. Hamish stepped forward. "Blair," he said. The word was quiet, almost pleasant, but there was a thinness in it that made Gavin Harte lift his eyebrows. Blair turned. "What?" "You'll no bully a waitress for being in the way of your temper." For a second, the only sound was the rain. Blair's face darkened. "Mind yourself, Macbeth." "I am. That's why I'm saying it softly." Gavin gave a delighted little laugh. "How charming. Lochdubh policing has the texture of damp tweed and the threat level of a knitting needle." "No one asked you?" Blair snapped. "Sadly, one rarely waits to be asked." Catriona looked as if she might faint from reputation damage alone. Ela slipped past them and vanished into the kitchen. Hamish followed Blair to the service door, where Blair took out a cigarette and remembered just in time that he was indoors. He crushed it unlit in his fist, which seemed to satisfy some part of him. "Listen to me," Blair growled. "If this turns into another Lochdubh circus, I'll have you shifted so far south you'll need a passport to see a sheep. You've threatened me with transfer before. And one day I'll mean it." "You always mean it. That's what makes it restful." Blair glared past him toward Gavin, who had returned to his table and was writing again. "What's he scribbling? A review, maybe?" "Then keep him sweet." "That may not be possible." "Why not?" Hamish glanced toward the kitchen. "He thinks the restaurant's been borrowing more than atmosphere." Blair stared. What does that mean? It means I'd rather know before I say. Blair hated that answer nearly as much as he hated not knowing. Near midnight, the last guests began to leave. Rain hammered the roof. The harbour lights blurred behind the wet glass. Archie McLean announced that he was going home to eat bread and cheese, just to steady himself after all the imagination. Mrs. Patel gave Catriona a polite good night and took her unopened chutney jar with her. Gavin Harte stayed. He sat at the harbour table, his chipped slate menu card beside him, his notebook open. Catriona stood opposite him with her arms folded. Hamish, who had been trying to persuade Lugs away from the kitchen door, heard Gavin say, "I'll need the permissions now." "Tomorrow," said Catriona. "Tonight, my office is not prepared. Your office is not being judged for presentation." Catriona's voice dropped. "You are enjoying this. I enjoy accuracy. You enjoy power." Gavin looked up at her. "Both can be useful." Hamish saw Isla watching from the kitchen doorway. Behind her, one of the cooks moved quickly out of sight. Gavin closed his notebook. "Recipe permissions, supplier invoices, cold room stock list. Then I'll compare them with what is actually in the cold room. You want to go through my stock? I want to know whether your local-only menu is local or only menu." Catriona said nothing. Gavin stood, gathering his notebook and pen. "I'll give you an hour to find the paperwork. After that, I rewrite the opening review before breakfast." Blair, who had returned from making an unsuccessful phone call by the door, heard only the end. "What's this now?" Gavin smiled. "Inspection, Inspector. No one inspects anything without me knowing. Then know it now." Blair turned to Hamish. "Macbeth, sort this." Hamish looked from Gavin to Catriona. The storm shook the windows, and somewhere in the kitchen the cold room hummed steadily, indifferent to pride, fear, and fine dining. "I'll stay a little while," he said. Catriona's eyes flashed. "That will not be necessary." Gavin picked up the chipped slate card and tapped it once against his notebook. "On the contrary," he said. "I suspect it may become very necessary indeed." Chapter 4. The Cold Room Door. By dawn, the rain had turned the lane behind the Lochside Table into a brown ribbon of water. Hamish had gone home at 1:30, after Gavin Harte finally agreed to inspect the cold room in the morning, and Catriona promised, through clenched teeth, that the paperwork would be ready. Blair had stomped off earlier, muttering about celebrities, restaurants, and policemen who mistook idleness for method. Lugs had slept badly, which meant Hamish had slept worse. At 6, the phone rang. He lifted it before the second ring. Macbeth. For a moment, there was only breathing. Then Isla Kerr said, "He's in the cold room." Hamish sat up. "Who is?" "Mr. Harte." "He's—" Her voice broke. "He's not moving." The harbour was grey and mean when Hamish arrived. The restaurant lights were on, though the windows looked dull now without candlelight. Catriona stood outside the kitchen door in a coat thrown over evening clothes, her face bare of makeup and control. Inside, the glamour had gone out of everything. The polished tables looked like props after a performance. A damp napkin lay on the floor. Somewhere, a machine hummed too loudly. Isla sat on a crate, wrapped in a chef's jacket. Her hands were white around a mug of tea. "I came early," she said as Hamish passed, "to clean the pass. The cold room door was shut. I thought someone had left stock inside wrong. Then I opened it." Hamish nodded once and went in. The cold room was at the back of the kitchen, a steel door, a rubber seal, and a bright handle with an emergency release on the inside. A young constable from Strathbane had arrived first and was standing too near everything. "Back," said Hamish. The constable obeyed. Gavin Harte lay on the floor just inside the cold room, one arm bent beneath him, his glasses fogged, his notebook gone. A clipboard lay near his hand. Several plastic tubs of herbs had fallen from a low shelf. There was no theatrical blood, no overturned shelves, no sign of a grand struggle, only the ugly stillness of a body in a place built to preserve things. Hamish stood a moment longer than he needed. He had not liked Gavin Harte. That did not matter. A man could be vain, cruel, clever, and alive at midnight. By morning he was evidence, and that was a failure of the world, not merely a case. Blair arrived 10 minutes later, red-faced and triumphant with irritation. "What have you touched?" "Nothing that needed leaving alone," said Hamish. Blair glared at the body. "Idiot locked himself in. Celebrity arrogance. Thinks even doors open for him. The door has an internal release." Then it failed. Hamish crouched near the lower edge of the door. Maybe. Blair hated maybe almost as much as he hated silence. "What's that?" Hamish did not answer at once. Fine black dust marked the floor near the inner release handle. Not much. Barely more than a smudge. Beneath the rubber seal at the bottom of the door, caught where a careless sweep might miss it, was a tiny triangular flake of black slate. Hamish took out an evidence bag. Blair leaned over him. "For heaven's sake, Macbeth, the man's dead and you're collecting dirt!" "Not dirt. What then? Menu?" Blair stared. "Have you been drinking?" Hamish lifted the flake carefully. It matched the colour of the broken slate card from Gavin's table. Smaller than the first piece, sharper at the point. He looked at the emergency release. The plastic housing was cracked. Not old damage. Fresh. With a pale line where pressure had split it. Blair saw it then. His mood changed. It did not improve. It merely found a better target. "Right," he said. "Murder." Catriona, standing in the doorway, made a sound like a breath caught on glass. Blair turned on her. "Who hated him?" "No one hated him. Don't be stupid. Everyone hated him. That's the first honest thing about him." Hamish rose. "He argued with Morag Grant." Blair's eyes lit. "The soup woman!" She was angry. She threatened him. She said his cleverness didn't improve the food. "That'll do for a start. It will not do for an end." Blair pointed toward the body. "Stolen recipe, public insult, dead man. Even you can follow that, Macbeth." Hamish looked past him into the cold room. The stock shelves had been disturbed, but not wildly. A crate of shellfish sat half pulled out. A printed stock list lay on the floor, damp at one corner. Gavin had come looking, then. Or someone had wanted it to look as if he had. "Where's his notebook?" Hamish asked. Blair blinked. "What?" "He had a black notebook last night. Wrote in it all evening." Catriona said too quickly, "He may have taken it with him." "He is here," said Hamish. Her mouth shut. Blair barked at the young constable. "Search." Hamish watched Catriona's hands. They were clasped in front of her, but the right thumb kept rubbing against the side of her forefinger, as if removing a stain that was no longer there. Isla spoke from behind them, very small. Mr. Harte came back. Everyone turned. She swallowed. "After Mr. Macbeth left, I was finishing cutlery. Mr. Harte said he'd forgotten his scarf, but he went to the office with Miss Bell." Catriona's face sharpened. "Ila, I only saw him," Isla whispered. "I didn't hear." Blair stepped toward the girl. "What time?" "Maybe 1:45. And then I went home. Convenient." Hamish's voice came soft. "Leave her be." Blair rounded on him, but something in Hamish's face stopped the words. Outside, the rain eased for a moment, and the harbour gave a long wooden creak against its ropes. Hamish looked again at the broken release, the slate dust, the missing notebook, and the damp stock list. The easy story was already forming around Morag Grant. Blair liked easy stories. Villages liked them too, when fear was looking for somewhere to sit. But the little black flake under the cold room seal told another one. Someone had not merely closed a door. Someone had made sure it would not open. Chapter 5. Grey stew, real soup. Strathbane Police Station had a canteen built to lower expectations. The stew that morning was grey, thick, and without ambition. Blair ate it angrily, as if the food had personally failed to solve the case. Hamish sat opposite him with a mug of tea and no desire to test the stew. "Morag Grant," Blair said, stabbing his spoon into the bowl. "That's your woman." "She was angry," said Hamish. "She had motive." "Aye, she was humiliated in public." "Aye, she said the dead man had mocked Her mother's soup. Ah, yeah. Blair slammed down his spoon. Then why are you sitting there like a heron in a graveyard? Because a good motive is not the same as a good murder. Blair's face reddened. Do not start that Highland philosophy with me. It was only grammar. Blair pushed a clear evidence sleeve across the table. Inside was a torn strip of paper, damp at one edge. Found this under the cold room shelving. Hamish leaned closer. The writing was Gavin Harte's, sharp and impatient. Recipe permissions false. C. B. knows. The line ended there. The rest of the page had been torn away. Blair looked pleased with himself. There. CB could be Catriona Bell, but Morag could have stolen it to make trouble. Why would Morag tear out a note that points to Catriona? Because guilty people panic. They do, said Hamish. But not always in ways that help other folk. Blair ignored that. We bring Morag in. Push her. She'll crack. She's not a walnut, she shouted at him. So did half the room, in their heads. Blair stood. Macbeth, if you let sentiment blind you, I'll have you moved. Hamish looked at the stew. Would the new place have a better canteen? Blair swore, and went to shout at someone else. By midday, Hamish was back in Lochdubh. The rain had softened to a wet drift, and the harbour seemed to be sulking under low cloud. The Lochside Table was closed, its smart windows dark. Already 2 tourists had taken photographs of the police tape. Hamish went instead to the Italian restaurant, where the soup came in a proper bowl and did not need a speech to explain itself. Mrs. Patel was there, sitting near the window with coffee she had not ordered so much as accepted as her right. Sit down, Hamish, she said. You look underfed. I've seen Strathbane stew. That is not the same as food. The owner brought him soup without being asked. Hamish tasted it and felt the day improve by a small but measurable amount. Mrs. Patel waited until he had swallowed twice. They will blame Morag, she said. They are already trying. She was angry enough. Aye, but anger in a woman like Morag is usually meant to be heard, not acted upon. Hamish looked at her. You've been thinking. I sell chutney, Constable. People mistake that for simplicity. He smiled faintly. She lowered her voice. Catriona wanted the village's stories. Not the village. There is a difference. There often is. And tourists will call a thing authentic once it is printed neatly on black card. If Morag had served that soup in her kitchen, they would have called it plain. Hamish thought of the slate dust on Gavin's thumb. Did you see anyone near Gavin's table after he chipped the menu card? Catriona lifted it when he went to speak to the Glasgow journalist. She looked annoyed. I thought she was checking the damage. Did she take it away? No, not then. Hamish filed that away. His phone rang. Elspeth's voice came bright and careful. Hamish! A celebrity chef dead in a luxury restaurant. You must have known I'd call. I was hoping your phone had fallen in the sea. That would not stop me. Was Gavin Harte murdered? The weather is wet. Was he locked in the cold room? There's a har sitting low over the harbour. Was the restaurant lying about local food? Elspeth, you'll get more nourishment from actual soup. She laughed. So there is a food scandal. I did not say that. You never say the useful thing. That is how I know it exists. He softened, despite himself. Do not make Morag Grant into a headline. There was a small pause. Is she the easy suspect? Aye. Then I'll be careful. Careful is better than clever. I shall try not to take that personally. After the call, Hamish went back to the restaurant with permission nobody had clearly given, but nobody had yet stopped. In the office, Catriona sat among invoices, menus, reservation sheets, and a laptop open to a stock system. She looked as if she had slept for 20 minutes and hated each one. Inspector Blair has already taken copies, she said. I'm not Blair. No. You are quieter, which is worse. Hamish glanced at the screen. Who uses the stock system? Managers. Me. Head chef. And last night? She hesitated. I don't know. That's an odd thing not to know. It was opening night. We were busy. He looked at the printed stock list from the cold room floor, then at the screen. There was a revision timestamp. Lindenshire Seafen. Hamish read it again. midnight, and a little after. A time when guests were gone, staff were cleaning, and Gavin Harte was still demanding proof. What changed? He asked. Catriona's shoulders tightened. Minor corrections. Imported shellfish removed? She stared at him. Industrial soup base removed too, he said. That was not used in the dish. But it was in the cold room. Her face had gone very still. Before she could answer, Blair came in behind him, heavy-footed and pleased to interrupt. Macbeth, stop bothering paperwork. We're going to Morag Grant's. Hamish closed the stock list folder. Outside, the rain had started again, tapping at the office window like impatient fingers. Morag Grant had grief, pride, and anger enough for Blair. But the stock list had been changed after midnight, and shame was beginning to point in a different direction. Chapter 6. The Easy Cook. Morag Grant's cottage stood above the harbour road, its windows looking out over grey water and a line of boats tugging at their ropes. Inside, it smelled of peat smoke, wool drying by the stove, and proper broth. Hamish stood in the doorway and felt at once the difference between memory and marketing. There was no polished driftwood here, no slate card, no white script promising heritage. There was only a blackened pot on the stove, a biscuit tin on the table, and Morag Grant standing with her arms folded as if she had been expecting accusation and had decided not to make it comfortable. "You've come for my confession?" she said. "I was hoping for tea. That depends on whether you brought Blair. He'll arrive whether I brought him or not." Morag gave a short nod and turned to the kettle. "Then you'd better sit before the shouting starts." Hamish sat at the table. The biscuit tin was open. Inside were old recipe cards, some browned at the edges, some written in 2 different hands. One card had been mended with tape so old it had gone yellow. Morag saw him looking. "My mother's," she said. "And her mother's before that, though Granny wrote like a hen walking through soot." Hamish smiled. "Catriona saw these?" "Some of them." "Not all. Did you sign anything?" "No." "Nothing at all?" She poured tea with more force than tea required. "She gave me a form. Said it was just to show I'd taken part in her community project. I told her I would read it later." "And did you?" "I put it under a catalogue and forgot it. That is not a legal system, but it is the truth." Hamish took the cup. "Where is it now?" Morag's face darkened. "Gone, maybe. Or still under something. I don't keep papers the way grand folk do." "You were angry last night." "I was. You said Gavin deserved to choke on his own cleverness." She looked him straight in the face. "Aye. And if words killed, half the village would be widows and orphans by Tuesday." There was no tremor in her voice. Only exhaustion. Hamish believed anger. He believed shame. He believed that Morag might have slapped a man, shouted him from her kitchen, or refused him soup until the judgment day. He did not yet believe she had followed him into a cold room and made a mechanical trap of a broken slate card, but belief was a soft thing. Proof was harder. "Where were you after service?" he asked. "Here." "Alone? Who would I invite?" "Gavin Harte." She looked toward the stove. "I came home. I made broth because I was angry, and cooking is better than breaking things. I sat there and watched it simmer like a fool." "Did anyone see you?" "No." The answer hung between them. Then the front door opened without a knock. Blair filled the doorway, followed by a uniformed constable who had the miserable look of a man carrying out orders he hoped nobody would remember. "Well, well," said Blair. "The grieving cook at her cauldron." Morag's face hardened. "Get out of my house." "Police business. You've no manners for it." Blair stepped inside and looked around with satisfaction, as if a cottage kitchen were a crime scene merely by being poor. His eyes went to the biscuit tin. "What's this?" "Recipes," said Morag. He picked up a card. Hamish stood. "Careful." Blair waved it. "This your famous soup, Mrs. Grant? Worth killing for, was it?" Morag went pale. Hamish's voice changed. It did not grow loud. It thinned. "Put it down." Blair turned slowly. "Do not give me orders in front of a suspect. Then do not act like a fool in front of evidence." The constable stared at the floor. Blair's mouth tightened, but he dropped the card back into the tin. It landed crookedly. Morag reached out and straightened it with 2 fingers, a small movement that hurt more than tears would have done. Blair began asking questions badly. Where had she gone? Who had she spoken to? Why had she threatened Gavin? Had she known the cold room door? Had she taken his notebook? Had she returned to the restaurant after midnight? Morag answered each one, stiff and short. No, no, because he was cruel. No, no, no. Blair leaned forward. You hated him. I hated what he enjoyed. Same thing. No, said Morag. It is not. Hamish watched her hands. They were rough from work, clean except for flour caught near one nail. There was a faint smell of peat smoke on her cardigan and on the recipe cards. No dark slate dust showed on the table, the tin, or her fingers. Your glasses, he said suddenly. Morag blinked. What? You wear them for reading. She pointed to the sideboard. A pair of spectacles lay beside a folded newspaper and a jar of loose buttons. I forgot them last night, she said. Had to hold that ridiculous menu halfway across the table to read it, Hamish remembered. Morag squinting at the slate card. Morag asking whether the soup was hers or a poem. Morag unable to read small script, without help. The restaurant stock system was on a screen. The changes had been made after midnight. Whoever made them had read lines, selected items, removed entries. Not impossible, without glasses. But for Morag, unlikely. Blair did not care. We're taking you in. No, said Hamish. Blair turned on him. No? Not yet. You defending her because she feeds you? I'm stopping you because you've got anger and no mechanism. Mechanism? Blair spat the word. The cold room release was wedged. The stock list was changed. Gavin's notebook is missing. Morag's fury explains why folk will believe it. It doesn't explain how she did it. For a moment, Blair looked ready to explode. Then he saw the constable watching and chose a different kind of cruelty. Fine. But don't leave the village, Mrs. Grant. Morag gave him a look of contempt. I've lived here 62 years. Where would I go? Paris? Blair slammed out. When the door shut, Morag sat down heavily. Hamish picked up the old recipe card Blair had disturbed and placed it gently back in the tin. Morag did not thank him. After a while she said, He'll make them think I did it. Some already will. And you? Hamish looked at the pot on the stove, at the worn cards, at the spectacles resting by the newspaper. I think someone wanted them to. Outside, rain ticked steadily on the window. The broth simmered, honest and plain, while the easy story cooled. Chapter 7. Hamish's Big Mistake. By the next morning, Lochdubh had decided 3 different versions of the truth and was testing a 4th. Patel's shop was full, though nobody seemed to need much. Mrs. Wellington had come in for tea bags despite having bought tea bags the day before. Archie McLean studied tins of sardines with theatrical care. The Curry sisters stood near the biscuits, speaking in low voices that carried beautifully. It is always the quiet ones, Nessie said. Morag is not quiet, Jessie replied. No, but she is quiet when she is not speaking. That is true. Hamish entered, with his cap pulled low against the rain, and found every head turning toward him. Morning, he said. The village murmured morning back, with the careful innocence of people who had just been discussing him. Mrs. Patel was behind the counter, weighing lentils for a woman who had never before shown interest in lentils. She gave Hamish a look that said she knew he had come for information and wished he would not collect it in front of the entire parish. He waited until the lentil customer left, which took some time because she remembered suddenly that she might require matches, soap, and a small packet of raisins. At last, Hamish leaned on the counter. I need a quiet word. In Lochdubh? Said Mrs. Patel. That is ambitious. He lowered his voice. It's about Morag. The shop did not go silent. That would have been too obvious. Instead, several people became intensely interested in objects close enough to hear over. Hamish should have taken Mrs. Patel outside. He knew that even as he spoke, but he was tired, and his mind was on slate dust, stock lists, and a frightened waitress. "Do not repeat this," he said. Mrs. Patel's eyebrows lifted. "That sentence has never worked in human history. I mean it. There may have been a form. Something Catriona gave Morag to sign. Morag says she didn't sign it, but if Catriona has one with her name on it, you think it was forged? I think it might be. I want proof before folks start pitying Morag as if she gave away her own mother's soup for nothing." Mrs. Patel's expression softened. Ah, that little sound was the danger. It was sympathy. Sympathy travelled faster than blame because it wore cleaner shoes. Hamish realised his mistake a breath too late. "Say nothing," he added. "I will say nothing unhelpful. That is not the same thing. It is better than promising silence and exploding." Behind a tower of oatcakes, Jessie Curry whispered, "Signed something?" Nessie whispered back, "Did not understand it, likely." Mrs. Wellington murmured, "Poor soul." Archie McLean said to a tin of sardines, "Pride will not read fine print." Hamish closed his eyes briefly. By noon, the story had grown legs, borrowed boots, and crossed the village twice. Morag had signed away her recipe. Morag had not known what she signed. Morag had known exactly what she signed, but regretted it when money appeared. Hamish had found the paper. Hamish was hiding the paper. Hamish was protecting Morag because she fed him. At 2:00, Morag stopped him outside the churchyard wall. The rain had eased, leaving the stones dark and the grass shining. She wore no hat. Damp, silver hair clung near her temples. "So now I am a fool as well as a murderer," she said. Hamish felt the hit of it. "I did not say that. You said enough for them to make it." "I was trying to keep them from blaming you." "No," she said. "You were trying to manage my shame without asking whether it was yours to manage." That silenced him. Morag's mouth trembled once, but no tears came. "My mother's recipe was taken. Then my anger was taken. Now my dignity is being passed round with the newspapers." "I'm sorry." She looked at him for a long moment. "Aye," she said. "You may be." Then she walked away. Hamish stood in the wet road and felt smaller than he liked. A constable could be wrong by shouting. He could also be wrong by speaking softly in the wrong place. Blair found him an hour later outside the police station. "You've been stirring witnesses," Blair said. "I've been breathing. It has that effect here. Don't get clever. Strathbane says this case is already too pretty for the papers. Celebrity chef, fancy restaurant, village cook. If you muddy it with local gossip, I'll have you out. It was muddy before I stood in it." Blair jabbed a finger at him. "Morag Grant is still our best suspect. She is your easiest. Same thing when a jury's tired." Hamish's voice cooled. "That is why you should never be allowed near tired juries." Blair looked ready to answer when a boy came round the corner carrying a crate of empty bottles from the restaurant. He was tall, thin, and trying to appear older than he was. Hamish recognised him. "Yuan Kerr." The boy stopped. Blair barked. "What?" "Ela's brother," said Hamish. "Waiter at the Lochside Table." Yuan looked from one policeman to the other, then down at the crate. "I've nothing to say. No one asked yet," Hamish said. "That's usually when it's safest." Blair stepped forward. "You saw something." Yuan's face closed. Hamish put a hand lightly on Blair's arm. Blair shook it off, but the pause was enough. "Walk with me," Hamish said to Yuan. "I need to get these back. They'll still be empty in 5 minutes." They walked a little way toward the harbour. Mist hung low over the water. The restaurant sat at the edge of it, closed and polished, and watched. Hamish said nothing. After a while, Irwan spoke. "My sister needs that job." "Aye. Catriona said if staff talked, the restaurant might never reopen. Then no wages. Isla's saving for college." "I understand." "No, you don't. Police ask questions, then leave. We stay where folks stop hiring us." Hamish accepted that because it was true. "What did you see?" he asked. Yuan kicked a pebble into the gutter. "After midnight. Near 12:30. Maybe later. I was taking rubbish out back. Miss Bell was by the cold room door." "Alone?" "I thought so." Then I heard Mr. Harte's voice from the office corridor. He was angry but quiet. "Did you see her go into the cold room?" "No." "Did she have anything in her hand?" Yuan frowned. "A napkin. Folded. Black mark on it, maybe. I thought it was sauce." Hamish went still. "Did you tell Blair?" Yuan gave him a look. "Would you, if you were me?" "Fair question." Hamish looked across at the Lochside Table. The black slate menus were no longer on the tables. He could see through the window that they had been cleared away. "Your sister did nothing wrong," he said. "That won't matter if the wrong person is angry." "No," said Hamish. "But it will matter when the right person is afraid." Yuan shifted the crate in his arms. "Do not use my name unless you must." Hamish nodded. As the boy went off, Lugs appeared from behind the station wall with a stolen heel of bread and the guilty confidence of a successful thief. He dropped it at Hamish's feet, then looked proud of his contribution. Hamish bent, picked it up, and sighed. "Evidence, is it?" Lugs wagged once. Hamish looked again toward the closed restaurant, thinking of a folded napkin, a black mark, a missing notebook, and Morag Grant's face when she told him her dignity had been passed round. His mistake had cost her something. The least he could do now was make it useful. Chapter 8. Slate, under the nail. By late afternoon, the police tape outside the Lochside Table had gone slack in the damp. The restaurant looked smaller without customers. The candles had been cleared. The polished tables sat bare, and the harbour windows showed only mist and the blurred shapes of boats. All the expensive warmth had leaked out of the place, leaving stone, wood, and the smell of cold herbs. Hamish let himself in through the service door. He did not feel especially guilty. Catriona had told him, in a voice full of legal caution, that the police could inspect whatever was necessary. She had meant Strathbane police with forms and gloves and loud feet. Hamish considered himself included by geography. Lugs came with him, though not by invitation. The dog slipped through the door just before it closed and moved at once toward the kitchen, nose low, as if crime and leftovers were closely related sciences. "Do not touch anything," Hamish said. Lugs ignored this in the manner of officers with seniority. The kitchen had been scrubbed too well. That was Hamish's first thought. Kitchens after a death usually held their shock in small disorder. A cloth left in a sink, a pan unwashed, a chair turned wrong. Here, everything had been straightened. The pass was clean. The knives were aligned. Even the bin lids had been wiped. Too neat was not guilt, but it was often fear, dressed as discipline. Hamish went into the dining room and opened the cupboard where the slate menu cards had been stacked. There were 24 of them, each wiped and wrapped in thin cloth to keep from scratching. He laid them out one by one on the nearest table. Most were whole. 2 had small chips along the edge. 1, from Gavin's harbour table, had a corner missing. Hamish knew it because the chalk mark from the first course still ghosted across it. A memory of shoreline. The missing piece left a triangular bite, clean on one side and rough on the other. He took from his pocket the first tiny flake he had picked up on opening night, sealed now in a little bag. It came from the same card. Then he looked at the second flake, the one from under the cold room door seal. Smaller, but the same dark grain, the same brittle shine. Catriona came in behind him. "I thought someone was here." "Aye," said Hamish. "Someone is." Her eyes went to the cards on the table. "Those are expensive." So was the review Gavin was going to write. She folded her arms. "Inspector Blair has already been through this. Blair goes through things like a cow through washing. I don't know what you expect to find. Neither do I sometimes. It keeps life fresh." She came closer, saw the chipped card, and her face tightened. "Gavin broke that while showing off," she said. "You saw him?" "I did." "Then it means nothing." "It meant nothing when it broke. That's not always the same as meaning nothing later." Catriona looked tired enough to be almost honest. "Do you know what he would have done to us? To you? To the restaurant? To the staff? To everyone who believed this could work, Morag believed her mother's recipe mattered. It did matter. Under whose name? Catriona's mouth hardened. You are not a food critic, Hamish. No. I'm more interested in what folk do after supper. For a second, something like panic flickered in her eyes. Then she turned toward the kitchen. I have calls to make. About reopening? About survival. She left him with the slate cards. Hamish waited until her footsteps faded, then followed slowly. In the kitchen, Luggs had found a linen basket beneath the manager's station. He had not disturbed it, exactly. He had pressed his nose into one folded napkin and was now sneezing with great moral offence. Out of there, Hamish said. Luggs sneezed again, then sat and looked wounded. Hamish crouched. The basket held used napkins, all laundered badly or not yet sorted. Most carried ordinary stains. Wine, butter, sauce, the faint green smear of some garnish no crofter would trust. One napkin, folded twice and pushed down the side, had a darker mark along the crease. Not sauce. Hamish lifted it carefully. Fine black dust clung to the linen. Slate dust. There was more of it caught in the fold, as if something broken had been wrapped there for a moment. A sharp little line had scored the cloth. Not enough to tear it. Enough to mark pressure. He looked back at the cold room door. A person could break the slate card at Gavin's table. Later, on trumper. Wrap it in a napkin to avoid cutting a hand or leaving dust. Use it as a wedge against the emergency release. Snap the plastic housing with force. Remove what remained. Toss it with kitchen rubbish, or outside, where rain and gulls and cats would do the rest. He placed the napkin in a bag. Behind him, Catriona said, What are you doing? Hamish turned. She stood in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame. Her gaze was not on him, but on the linen basket. Collecting laundry, he said. This is absurd. Aye. Most murders are, once you remove the drama. Her face flushed. You think I killed him with a menu? I think someone used a piece of one to stop a door opening. She laughed once, sharply. That sounds ridiculous. It does, said Hamish. Until a man is dead in the cold room. The laugh died. For a moment, neither moved. The mist pressed against the windows. Somewhere outside, a gull cried over the bins. Then Catriona said quietly, You should be careful. People here like simple villains. If you take Morag away from them, they will need another. Hamish looked at her hand on the doorframe. Beneath one nail, near the edge of the thumb, was a faint black crescent. Maybe dust, maybe nothing, but fear had made her forget to hide it. I found, he said, that simple villains are usually the ones someone else has arranged for us. Luggs sneezed one final time. As if agreeing, Hamish left with the napkin, the matching slate card, and the uncomfortable knowledge that the case had grown smaller, sharper, and more practical. The question was no longer who had been hurt enough to hate Gavin Harte. It was who had known exactly how to trap him. Chapter 9. Sonsie and the Missing Corner. That night, the storm sat over Lochdubh like a bad-tempered guest who had lost the road home. The coast road was blocked beyond the bend by a fallen branch. The electricity flickered twice before supper, and the wind worried at the police station windows until the old frames complained. Hamish lit a borrowed oil lamp and set it on the kitchen table. Its light made the room look older and kinder than it was. Luggs occupied the warm patch near the stove with the certainty of a creature who had solved life by refusing to rush it. Hamish laid out the evidence on the table. One black slate menu card, chipped at the corner. One small flake from Gavin Harte's table. One smaller flake from beneath the cold room seal. One folded linen napkin marked with dark dust. One torn notebook strip. Recipe permissions false. CB knows. One printed stock list changed at 017. He stared at them until the words and objects began to lose meaning. The difficulty with small clues was that they could make a man feel clever before they made him right. He rose, put the kettle on, and made tea so strong it would have argued with Blair. Then he sat again and took the chipped menu card in both hands. The corner had broken in 2 stages. He could see that now. The first break had been public and careless, when Gavin tapped the card on the table. The second break had been sharper, more forced. Something had been pressed, wedged, twisted. The cold room release was not complicated. A person trapped inside pushed the internal handle. The mechanism released the latch. Unless something blocked it. Unless something thin and hard had been shoved into just the right place. Slate was brittle, sharp, flat, and found everywhere in a restaurant foolish enough to make menus out of roof material. A soft thump came at the window. Lugs opened one eye. Hamish looked up. For a moment, there was only his own reflection in the dark glass. Then a shape appeared on the sill outside, lean, wet, and deeply unimpressed by weather. Sonsie crouched there, tail flicking once, something black held carefully in his mouth. Hamish opened the window. The cat stepped in, as if granting the room permission to continue existing. He dropped the object onto the table, shook rain from one paw, and began cleaning himself. "Good evening to you, too," said Hamish. Lugs lifted his head, considered protest, then decided age and warmth outranked pride. Hamish picked up the object. It was a hard black fragment, triangular, larger than the flakes he had already found. One edge was rough from the first break. Another edge was clean and sharp where pressure had snapped it. Rainwater shone in its little ridges. He held it against the missing corner of Gavin's slate menu card. It fitted, not perfectly, because small bits were gone, but well enough. The shape completed the bite in the card. The missing corner had not vanished into sweeping, as Catriona had suggested. It had left the restaurant, gone into the yard or rubbish, and somehow come within reach of a cat who had no respect for police procedure. "Where did you find this?" Hamish asked. Sonsie ignored the question, which was one of his more honest habits. Hamish went to the back door with a lamp. Rain blew in at once. He stepped outside into the narrow yard behind the station and looked toward the lane that ran past the restaurant bins. The wind carried the smell of seaweed, diesel, and wet cardboard. If the fragment had been thrown out with kitchen rubbish, a gull or cat could easily have moved it. Sonsie, being Sonsie, had brought it home not as help but as ownership. Still, help did not cease to be help, because it had arrived arrogantly. Back inside, Hamish dried the fragment and set it beside the napkin. The mark on the linen now made sense. The slate corner had been wrapped there, not for long. Long enough to carry it from a table or manager's station to the cold room door without cutting the hand or leaving obvious dust. He took a pencil and sketched the cold room release from memory. If the slate was forced in beside the inner handle, it would stop the release from moving fully. A trapped man might push harder. The pressure would crack the plastic housing. The slate might splinter. One small flake would fall beneath the seal. The larger piece could be pulled out from outside when the door was opened later, then hidden or thrown away. Gavin Harte had not frozen because he was arrogant. He had frozen because someone had made arrogance look like accident. Hamish sat back. Who knew the cold room mechanism? Staff? Catriona? The head chef? Perhaps anyone who had worked there long enough to hear complaints about the stiff release. Who had reason? Morag had anger. Catriona had ruin hanging over her head. Someone else might have feared losing wages, reputation, investment, or a lie dressed up as local pride. But only one person had been seen near the cold room door after midnight, with a folded napkin marked dark. Only one person's office login had changed the stock list after Gavin began asking questions. Only one person had watched the notebook, as if every word in it were a knife. Hamish looked at the torn strip again. C. B knows. Not CB. Suspects. Not CB. Benefits. Knows. The kettle began to hiss again, though the water was already boiled. A small domestic warning against neglect. Hamish turned it off. Sonsie leapt down from the chair, having cleaned himself and dismissed the human world. At the window he paused, glanced back once, and slipped into the storm. Lugs sighed from the stove, as if all this thinking had disturbed his evening. Hamish placed the slate fragment in an evidence bag. The case, for all its fancy words and polished menus, had become plain. A stolen recipe. a false stock list, a missing notebook, a broken card, a trapped man, and somewhere in Lochdubh, a woman who had built elegance out of other people's memories was waiting for the village to believe the ugly little story she had left for them. Chapter 10. The Midnight Stock Change. The office of the Lochside Table was too small for its paperwork and too neat for its troubles. Reservation books sat in a straight pile. Supplier invoices were clipped by month. A framed review from one of Catriona Bell's Edinburgh ventures hung above the desk, praising rural elegance without rustic compromise. Hamish read that twice and decided it meant the reviewer had never been hungry. Blair stood by the printer, glaring at it. "It's jammed again." "It may be frightened," said Hamish. "Machines don't get frightened. Not usually before you arrive." Blair slapped the side of the printer. A light flashed red. Hamish left him to it and opened the stock system on the office computer. Catriona had given them the password after Blair threatened to seize everything, including a decorative lamp that had offended him. She was downstairs now with her solicitor on the phone, speaking quietly and sharply. Macnab stood beside Hamish, patient as a stone wall. "The midnight change," Hamish said. There. The screen showed the revision log. 0, 17, user, C. Bell stock adjustment printed. Items removed from current cold room list. Imported shellfish mix. Prepared soup base. Frozen herb garnish. Blair stopped fighting the printer. That proves she was hiding fraud. It proves the list was changed. Same thing. Not in court. Blair hated court almost as much as he hated printers. Hamish clicked the next entry. Another print command had been sent at 021, but the printer error log showed a jam. The document had printed halfway, then stopped. Macnab pointed to the evidence folder. "The damp stock list from the cold room floor?" "Aye," said Hamish. "Half printed. Torn at the corner. Gavin must have had it. Or someone wanted us to think he did." Blair snorted. "He went in there, checked the stock, got trapped. Simple. Too simple." "You always say that when simple is right." Hamish took out the torn notebook strip. "Recipe permissions false, C. B knows." "He wrote this before he died," Hamish said, lightly after speaking with Morag and seeing whatever Catriona failed to show him. "His notebook vanishes. The page is torn. But this strip stays behind. Maybe Morag tore it." Morag was home without her glasses. "For heaven's sake, Macbeth, people can murder without spectacles." "Aye. Done they change a stock system? Print a false list? Remove imported items? Wedge a cold room release? Steal a notebook? And leave no slate dust on their hands?" Blair opened his mouth, then closed it. This was not agreement. It was merely traffic waiting at a red light. Hamish laid the evidence in order across the desk. The chipped menu card, the matching slate fragment Sonsie had brought, the flake from the cold room seal, the dust-marked napkin, the torn note, and the printed revision log. Macnab looked at them. "It's a chain. It's nearly one," said Hamish. "Nearly?" Blair exploded. "What more do you want? A confession written in soup?" "I want why she did not simply let him write a bad review." Blair waved a hand at the office. "Money, pride, fraud, take your pick." Hamish looked at the framed review again. Rural elegance without rustic compromise. He thought of Catriona's careful dress, her polished voice, the way she looked at Lochdubh as if it were both her birthplace and an embarrassing relative. "Not only money," he said. Macnab waited. She needed Lochdubh to become something she could claim without being claimed by it. The recipes gave her roots. The restaurant gave her polish. Gavin was going to say both were false. Blair looked pained. "Can we arrest folk without the poetry?" "Sometimes poetry is motive with better shoes." A knock came at the door. Ewan Kerr stood outside, pale and stubborn. Isla was behind him, gripping the sleeve of his jacket. "I'll tell it," he said, not looking at Blair. "But not if he shouts." Blair inhaled. Hamish said, "He will not shout." Blair's face suggested he considered this a violation of professional practice. Ewan stepped in. "I took rubbish out after midnight. Miss Bell was by the cold room door with a folded napkin in her hand. I thought it had sauce on it. Black sauce, maybe. She looked at me like I'd walked into her bedroom. What time? Macnab asked. After 12:30. I don't know exactly. And Mr. Harte? I heard him in the office corridor. He said, You've sold them their own lives without the names. Then Miss Bell told him to lower his voice. Isla whispered. Ewan! He glanced back at her. No, I'm saying it now. Hamish felt a quiet respect for the boy. Fear did not vanish because truth appeared. Sometimes truth was only fear standing upright. Blair leaned forward. Did you see her trap him? No. Then, enough, said Hamish. The word was soft, but the room cooled. Blair stepped back. Hamish turned to Ewan. Did Catriona carry anything else? A folder. Maybe his notebook. I only saw black cover under her arm when she passed the office. That mattered. Not enough alone. Enough with everything else. When the curs had gone, Macnab said, We can bring her in. We can, said Hamish. But she'll say panic, confusion, accident. She'll say Gavin broke the card himself, went into the cold room himself, and the rest is misunderstanding. Blair groaned. Then what? Hamish looked out the office window. Below, the dining room was being reset. Catriona had announced a community supper for the next evening, a stubborn attempt to show that the restaurant still belonged to Lochdubh. Locals had accepted invitations because curiosity was stronger than dignity, and free food stronger than both. She built this crime in public performance, Hamish said. Borrowed recipes, polished words, speeches about community. She let Morag be blamed in public too. So we let the truth arrive where the lie was meant to sit. Blair stared. You going to accuse her over dinner? I'm going to ask her questions over dinner. That is the same thing with napkins. Aye, said Hamish. But better manners. The printer suddenly spat out half a sheet, then stopped again. Blair snatched it up. The page showed the stock list before the midnight changes. Imported shellfish, prepared base, frozen garnish, all present and checked. Hamish took it from him carefully. There it was. The dull little bone beneath the pretty flesh. By evening, the rain had eased. A pale strip of light opened over the harbour, touching the closed restaurant windows. Hamish stood outside a moment before going home. The net shed looked elegant again from a distance. That, he thought, was the trouble with distance. Chapter 11. The reopening supper. Catriona Bell called it a community supper. Lochdubh called it many things before it arrived. Mrs. Wellington called it brave. Archie MacLean called it cheek. The Curry sisters called it not something one would miss, which meant they had been dressed since 4. By 7, the Lochside Table glowed again with candles, though not as confidently as before. The black slate menus had returned to the tables. The dishes promised were simpler now. Broth, fish, oatcakes, stewed apples. The words on the cards had been reduced, as if language itself had become a suspect. Morag Grant sat near the back, stiff in her chair. Hamish had asked her to come. She had refused. Then Mrs. Patel had gone to see her with a shawl and no advice, which had worked better. I am here, Morag had told Hamish at the door, because hiding makes folk think they were right. That's a sound reason. It does not mean I forgive you. No, said Hamish. I didn't expect a miracle before soup. Blair arrived in a suit that looked offended to be on him. Macnab came quietly behind. Elspeth had found a table near the window with a notebook closed beside her hand. She gave Hamish one brief look, then looked away, which meant she knew more than he wished and less than she wanted. Catriona stood at the centre of the room. She looked tired, but beautifully so. That had always been her talent. Even strain became part of the presentation. Her black dress was simple, her hair pinned back, her voice soft enough to make people lean toward it. Thank you for coming, she said. The last days have been painful. For Gavin Harte's family, for my staff, for this village, and for the future of what we tried to build here. Tried, thought Hamish. a word that asked for sympathy before admitting anything. Catriona went on. The Lochside Table was created to honour local food and local memory. Mistakes may have been made in how that was expressed. Morag's chair scraped faintly. But I hope tonight begins a restoration. Blair took one heavy step forward. Before we get to the soup, I'll be taking Morag Grant in for further questioning. The room broke into sound. Morag did not move. Her face went white, then hard. Hamish stepped between Blair and the room. No, he said. Blair stared at him. What did you say? I said no. You've had your easy story long enough. The room stilled. Catriona's eyes fixed on Hamish. He turned to her. Not loudly. Loudness would have suited Blair better than truth. Miss Bell, you told us Gavin Harte broke his Slate menu card while showing off. He did. You saw it. Aye. I saw the first break. The first? Hamish took the chipped card from an evidence folder and placed it on the nearest table. This card lost its corner in pieces. One small flake fell by Gavin's table. Another was found under the cold room door seal. The larger corner was thrown out and later found in the restaurant yard. Catriona gave a strained laugh. This is absurd. It is, said Hamish. A man died because of something absurd, Blair muttered. Get on with it. Hamish ignored him. The cold room emergency release did not simply fail. It was blocked. The broken slate corner was wrapped in a linen napkin, carried to the door, and wedged into the mechanism. When Gavin pushed from inside, the plastic housing cracked. A flake broke off and lodged under the seal. He laid the folded napkin beside the card. Slate dust was found in this napkin from the manager's station. Catriona's voice sharpened. Many people handled linen. Aye. But not many stood by the cold room door after midnight with a folded napkin in hand. Yuan Kerr, pale but upright by the kitchen door, looked at the floor. Isla stood beside him. Catriona saw them and understood. You believe a frightened boy over me? I believe frightened people when their fear costs them something. A murmur moved through the room. Hamish placed another sheet on the table. At 017, the stock list was changed from your office login. Imported shellfish, prepared soup base, frozen garnish all removed from the current list. Catriona's face closed. You were not only borrowing recipes, Hamish said. You were selling local purity while hiding stock that was not local at all. Gavin found both lies. He was cruel about them, but he found them. He would have destroyed us, she said. The words came before she could smooth them. Hamish's voice remained soft. Destroyed you. Her eyes flashed. You think this place was for me alone? Do you know what it takes to build something here? To make outsiders look at Lochdubh as more than rain, sheep and jokes? Morag spoke then, quiet but clear. You could have started by looking at us yourself. Catriona turned toward her. I was trying to honour you. No, said Morag. You were trying to use us without having to sit at our tables. The room absorbed that. Hamish took out the torn strip of notebook page. Gavin wrote, Recipe permissions false. CB knows. The rest of his notebook disappeared. Ewan saw a black book under your arm. You altered the stock list. You took the broken slate corner. You trapped Gavin in the cold room and let Morag's anger do the rest. Catriona stood very still. For a moment, Hamish thought she would deny it beautifully. Instead, her face changed. Not into guilt exactly, into outrage at the failure of her own story. He laughed, she said. He laughed at everything. At the room, at the food, at her soup, at me. He said he would make us a cautionary tale. So you made him a corpse, said Blair, pleased to have found a line. Hamish gave him a look. Blair quieted, grudgingly. Catriona looked around the restaurant. Candles, slate cards, villagers, staff, journalists pretending not to write with their eyes. I only meant to frighten him, she said. Hamish had heard that sentence before in different rooms, over different dead men. Then why take the notebook? She said nothing. Why change the stock list? Nothing. Why let Morag carry the shame? Catriona's mouth trembled. Because everyone already believed she might. There it was. The ugliest truth, plain and small. Morag closed her eyes. Macnab stepped forward, calm and formal. Catriona Bell, I am arresting you on suspicion of murder. Blair looked as if he wished to object, only because he had not said it first. Catriona did not struggle. She lifted her chin, but the room no longer mistook it for dignity. As Macnab led her out, her shoulder brushed one of the slate menus. It shifted, scraped, and settled flat again. No one spoke until the door closed. Then Archie McLean said, very quietly, "Will there still be soup?" Mrs. Patel looked at him. "There had better be. We have earned it." A strained laugh moved through the room. Not happy, but necessary. Morag rose. Hamish thought she would leave. Instead, she walked to the kitchen door and spoke to Isla. "If there's broth in there, lass, bring it out before it turns into a speech." And for the first time that evening, something like real warmth entered the Lochside Table. Chapter 12. Plain Soup. The next morning, Lochdubh looked as if it had been washed too hard. The storm had passed in the night, leaving the harbour bright with puddles and the air sharp with salt, diesel, and wet rope. The windows of the Lochside Table were dark. Without candlelight, the old net shed looked less like a temple of taste and more like what it had always been, a place built to work. Hamish stood outside it with his hands in his pockets. Blair was giving a statement to two reporters by the pier. "It was clear to me from the beginning," Blair said, "that the matter required firm handling. These fancy food places, with their mussels and their foams, and their heritage brothels." "Broth," said Elspeth quietly from beside Hamish. "Their heritage brothels," Blair continued, "are hotbeds of passion." Elspeth wrote nothing down. That was kinder than Blair deserved. "You're letting him take credit," she said. "I'm letting him talk. It's cheaper." She smiled, then looked toward the restaurant. "Morag? At home. Will she speak to me?" "Not today. Will she speak to you?" Hamish watched Blair mispronounce another menu term with confidence. "Eventually, maybe. If I deserve it." Elspeth looked at him more softly. "You were hard on yourself. I was careless with her shame. That is different." "Aye," said Hamish. "Worse, sometimes." A van arrived from Strathbane to collect boxed files, the remaining slate menus, and the cold room mechanism. One chipped black slate card went into an evidence case, with its fragments, dust, and folded napkin. Hamish watched it being sealed away. It had been meant to make simple food look elegant. In the end, it had told the plainest truth in the room. By noon, the village had begun doing what villages do after guilt has been moved from one doorstep to another. It tried to repair without admitting it had broken anything. A bag of potatoes appeared on Morag Grant's step. Then a smoked haddock. Then onions, milk, oatcakes, and a small jar of Mrs. Patel's chutney with a note that read only, "For when wanted." No one wrote sorry. In Lochdubh, sorry often arrived disguised as groceries. Hamish went up to Morag's cottage in the afternoon. Lugs came with him as far as the gate, then sat down with the air of a dog who believed emotional labour should be voluntary. Morag opened the door before Hamish knocked. "I saw you coming," she said. "That saves me damaging your knuckles." She did not smile, but she did step aside. The kitchen was warm. The old biscuit tin lay open on the table. Beside it was a clean sheet of plain paper. Morag had written the broth recipe again in careful, strong letters. At the top she had written, "Morag Grant's fish broth, after my mother, Elspeth Grant." Hamish looked at it. "That's a fine title. It tells the truth. Titles should, now and then." "Ah, yeah." She put the kettle on. "I'm still angry with you." "I know. You thought you were helping. I know that too. That is not an excuse." "No." The kettle began to murmur. Morag took 2 cups from the shelf. "But you did not let Blair drag me through Strathbane like a sack of turnips." I'd no have fancied your chances with a canteen stew. This time, almost against her will, she gave the smallest snort. It was not forgiveness, but it was a door unlatched. Later, when Hamish returned to the station, he found a bowl of broth waiting on his step, covered with a plate. There was no note. There did not need to be. He carried it inside and set it on the table. Luggs followed closely, his faith in human generosity fully restored. "No," said Hamish. Luggs sat, patient as a saint, and twice as hopeful. Hamish ate by the window as evening settled over Lochdubh. The broth was plain and smoky and deep, with nothing in it that needed explaining. It tasted of weather, work, memory, and a woman who had decided to write her own name where it belonged. Across the harbour, Sonsie appeared briefly on the wall near the closed restaurant, paused as if judging the entire human experiment, then vanished behind the lobster creels. The future of the Lochside Table was uncertain. The staff would find other work, with help that would be offered too gruffly to embarrass anyone. Catriona Bell would face court, and perhaps, in some lonely hour, understand that she had wanted Lochdubh's soul without accepting its people. Hamish doubted it. Understanding was rarer than guilt. He finished the soup and looked out at the harbour lights blinking on, one by one. Lochdubh had not become kinder overnight. It had blamed too quickly, gossiped too hungrily, and mistaken polish for worth. But Morag's recipe was back under Morag's name, and sometimes restoration began that small. The Lochside Table did not reopen quickly, and perhaps that was a mercy. Lochdubh still had soup, fish, oatcakes, and people who knew how to feed one another without writing poetry on a menu card. The chipped, black slate menu had been meant to make food look refined. In the end, its dust showed how easily elegance becomes disguise when it covers theft, false credit, and fear. There is nothing wrong with making simple things beautiful. The trouble begins when someone polishes another person's life, removes their name, and sells it back to them as taste. By evening, kettles boiled, Morag's broth steamed in honest bowls, and even Hamish admitted it was better than anything the celebrity chef had praised. Luggs waited for a dropped crust with deep patience, while Sonsie vanished along the harbour wall, having no interest in menus written by humans. When does admiration become theft, and would you notice if it happened to something ordinary you loved? Thank you for sharing another misty evening in Lochdubh. If this case left you thinking about food, memory, and the names that should never be rubbed away, keep a light in the window for our next Highland mystery. And when the village blames the cook whose recipe was stolen, Hamish follows a black slate chip into the cold room,